So, all right, here's the screen there. So Women in the Industry in the Balkans, the Rise and Fall of the Yugoslav Textile Sector came out for IB Torres, which is now a part of Bloomsbury, in 2019. Here you can see the picture that's on the cover page, and that comes from a movie by Croatian filmmaker Krešimir Golic titled Od 3 do 22, or from 3 to 10. So it's about this textile worker in a factory near Zagreb who's working de facto from 3 a.m. to 10 p.m. As a mother, but also as a kind of shift worker in this spinning mill. So this is the cover I chose because it's kind of representative of this issue of the double burden that many women faced in socialist Yugoslavia when they entered industrial work. And I'm going to come back to that issue in a moment. The funding sources for the project. I started as a research fellow within the SITSI project at the University of Edinburgh in 2012. And then I got another fellowship from the Netherlands, the NW Rubicon Fellowship, to continue my project there in Edinburgh. And then I was lucky to get another postdoc at the University of Pula, which encouraged foreign researchers to do research in Croatia. And that's where I did the bulk of my field work, basically. And then through an URIAS fellowship at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna, I was able to sit down and look at all the material I collected and write down the book. So that was also very good. And then, yeah, since I've been in Cork, I did mainly the corrections and I work on the proofs, which also took a while before publication. So, okay, I'm gonna go forward. So the theoretical framework of the book is mixing a number of disciplines. There's gender studies, gender history, labor history, social history, post-socialist studies, and post-Yugoslav studies. And this kind of mixture of different fields, if you want, is a way to overcome and complicate the prism of nationalism and ethnicity, which has led to a neglect of labor and social history since the 1990s. And within that labor and social history, what has also been neglected is the history of working class women and industrial female workers, especially. So I've been trying to expand the field of deindustrialization studies, which are very strong in, let's say, continental Europe, but especially in North America, Canada, and the United States. And I've applied this concept of deindustrialization to the Balkans. And this came after a very inspiring conference on deindustrialization organized by Stephen High in Montreal in 2014, which I had the luck to attend. And that kind of gave me show me the scope of these deindustrialization studies and what could be done in terms of applying such theory and such insights and methods to the context of Southeastern Europe. And in relation to that, I use in the book this concept of the structure of feeling, which was coined by Raymond Williams in the 70s. He defined it as a particular quality of social experience and relationship, historically distinct from other particular qualities, which give the sense of a generation or a period. And since then, this concept of the structure of feeling was taken up by industrial and post-industrial scholars to look at the way in which a certain kind of industrialization and deindustrialization are creating specific values and specific, let's say, patterns of everyday life that are then challenged when industries are closing and when the factories are no longer there. So this concept of the industrial structure of feeling was taken up again by Byrne in 2002, and then other authors such as Strangelman and again Stephen High worked on it further. And there is a lot of literature on this idea of the structure of feeling. So I thought this is a very specific concept, but it could be very productive for the field I'm looking at. So these are the sources and fieldwork sites that I've been looking into. The work is based on over 60 oral history interviews, 2/3 with blue-collar workers and 1/3 with white-collar workers from different generations. So I interviewed women who started working in the immediate post-war period in the 40s and 50s, were now elderly and retired. I interviewed women from, let's say, were in their middle ages, who started to work during socialism and then experienced privatization and work during transition as well. And then I interview some younger workers who have been only working after post-socialist transition from the 1990s onwards. So I try to get a kind of full scope of what it means to be a textile worker from, let's say, 1945 until the present, and how this role and this position changed from socialism to post-socialism, and from socialized state, let's say, social property factories or state-owned factories to privatized factories today. I combined this oral history interviews with archive material. So I mainly looked into workplace periodicals, which were very common during socialism. There were a number of workplace periodicals available. Each factory usually had its own magazine. So there was a lot of material there that could be sourced and used, even though, of course, it's heavily edited, we could say, and selective, but it still contained a number of testimonies from workers and retired workers, and so all that could be of use as well. And then I looked into recent press material, especially this material related to factory closures and how these closures were represented in the media in the 90s and 2000s, when most of the factories across the region went into bankruptcy or into privatization, and or both. So, and another material I use is photography and visual material. So I collected some old photographs from the archives. I collected some new photographs that I took myself in these abandoned factories. And then I looked also for some movies and documentaries that were produced during socialism and that took textile work as their main subject. So the one on the cover image is one of these documentaries. I also found a couple of other visual material, another documentary, and another fiction film that was set in a textile factory. So these were all part of the sources. In the end, there were a number of fieldwork sites, and they were not all key fieldwork sites, but let's say the key fieldwork sites were the one in Pula, the one in Zagreb, in Varaždin, in Sinj, in Osijek, and then the ones in Slovenia were kind of there to confirm sort of the narrative that I collected in Croatia. And then there were also some key fieldwork sites in North Macedonia, in Štip, and in Bosanski Novi Grad in Bosnia-Herzegovina. So in the end, these were the factories that were the most significant for my project. These were places where I could access textile workers because I had some contacts in the area, and yeah, so these were the main fieldwork sites. So what happened with textile factories in the post-Yugoslav region? Well, you're probably aware of it. So after the Yugoslav breakup and the end of the Yugoslav market, there were these very harsh criminal privatization processes that took place. And of course, there was also global competition from the war market that put these factories at a loss. So the industrialization and closures were widespread, and around 400,000 jobs were lost throughout the former Yugoslavia, of which 100,000 in Croatia, where I did most of my fieldwork. And there was this overall de-development process that has been singled out, this idea that, there was a lot of human and economic and social capital that was basically lost in the process of industrialization. So I started first in 2012 doing research on privatization and exploitation of textile workers in the contemporary times. And that's where I started noticing that, you know, it wasn't possible to look at what was happening right now without talking about the past, because workers kept talking about how the current condition was very much different from what they had experienced only 20 or 30 years earlier, or what their parents had experienced. So they felt this overexploitation in private firm. They felt that they were working for someone else's profit. They had this worry constantly about precarity and uncertainty. And they had this very strong discourse of nostalgia for the past and for the welfare and working conditions experienced in the past, or experienced by their parents and their grandparents. So Yugoslav times were presented as a model of normal life and modernity. And that's why I decided to move from this narrow focus into the post-socialist and post-Yugoslav time into looking into, and I decided to look into socialist times and into socialist industrialization. So one issue that's that I was also trying to do or to tackle in the book was this idea of gender relations during socialism and of the working mother gender contract that was in place in Yugoslavia. Because until now in the literature, working women's lives under state socialism have been generally read as victimized lives under state patriarchy due to this phenomenon of the double burden. So their voices have been very much neglected in the historiography. And of course, the double burden was a feature of state socialism, but textile factories, as I try to show in the book, were also sites of empowerment and self-realization and sociability. So we cannot only reduce, women's lives under socialism to victimization and oppression only. And that's why I try to look at this neglected subject, the working class or industrial female worker, and to look at the way in which, you know, we could complicate this narrative as well of state patriarchy by looking at the different intersections of ethnicity, class, gender, but also at the unevenness of Yugoslavia itself between the different regions, the unevenness also of the different welfare and labor regimes between 1945 and 1990, and so on. So on the one hand, I wanted to look into, you know, the socialist past, but also I wanted to look at working class women's lives and understand better how their lives changed from 1945 until the present. So textile factories, if we look back at the socialist period, we can see that textile factories are a site of important gender transformations and of this idea that women had to take part into the labor force in order to become emancipated. It was something that came from Marxist theory and that was applied in socialist Yugoslavia, so that in the process of industrialization of what was a largely agrarian country, textile factories became this sort of site for modernizing gender relations and modernizing, let's say, women's position in what were very rural and let's say, disadvantaged areas. And there was this strong pedagogical message of women's emancipation alongside, there should be industrialization, alongside industrialization. So socialist factories were seen as the sites for, let's say, socialist pedagogy. And they were, as Rory Archer and Goran Music highlighted, they were the socialist microcosm where workers would engage in productive labor, but also in a number of reproductive services such as canteens, health clinics, leisure facilities, housing, holiday resorts, and so on. So what happened through the decades of socialism was that workers developed a very specific industrial structure of feeling within the socialist factories, and especially within textile factories, which were largely female factories. Factories in Yugoslavia were seen or defined really in legislation as social property after Yugoslavia chose the path of self-management in contrast to the Soviet Union, from which it broke off in 1948. And what happened is that in these factories there was a very strong paternalist ideology. So trade unions were in charge of welfare redistribution, as I said, canteen housing, holiday resorts, and at the same time, workers interiorized this strong discourse of progress and sacrifice, that they had to sacrifice for the collective good and for the future of the following generations. Factories kind of became the center of working class sociability in a number of towns and small villages, and they organized yearly celebrations, excursions, and so on. And the structural feeling was based very much on this predictability and security of daily life, which included also welfare arrangements for working mothers and the possibility to take maternity leave, also to take a number of, let's say, flexible working arrangements when having children. That doesn't mean that these women didn't work very hard. They worked very hard, but there was a sort of tolerance for their family issues. And in one of these movies I analyzed, the factory is really seen as this, let's say, paternalist or maternalist entity to which workers can turn to if they have family issues or domestic abuse issues. And there was really some sort of feeling that, you know, workers could turn to the factory if they had social problems, or single mothers could get a flat, or so there was this kind of paternalistic and maternalistic ideology, and factories became second homes for many of these workers who started to work in these factories when they were 15, 16, and often didn't leave the factories until retirement. So one of the women I interviewed in Pula, who was retired for a number of years, she said that she had a conversation with one of her relatives, and the relative would tell her, aren't you happy now that you're at home? And she said, well, it's nice at home, but it was nicer when I would get ready in the morning, take the bus or get a lift from my husband and go to work. It was how it was, but we worked, we were young, we sang, we had fun, and so on. There was a party once in a while, we would bring something, treat ourselves, and so on. During the night shift, for the whole night shift, you work and work, but you also sing, not because you're happy, dear God, but like that, together with others, you know, in company. We were also somehow happy, weren't you? So one issue that came up in this interviews as well is this feeling of exploitation, but at the same time pride and sociability and collective kind of collective belonging to a certain place, and of course this worker in particular was very critical of the trade unions and was very critical of politics within the factory, but she would still miss this sociability and this connection that she made there, and this kind of feeling of meaning and purpose that the factory gave her. And that's something that was very was exacerbated by the way in which most of these factories closed off, because in many cases these privatization processes were very brutal and rapid, and from one day to the other, workers started to have their pay, their wages delayed, and then the bankruptcy came often very quickly because of criminal or mismanaged privatization processes. And this is from the Kamensko worker hunger strike from 2010, and the Kamensko workers were on hunger strike for a number of days, and you know, they felt that all the effort and all the work they had put into this factory had been just wiped out in this bankruptcy procedure, and they felt that all the protection and all the dignity that work was awarded during socialism was no longer there. So they said at that time, which they tell us was Tito's dark time and so on, you had more rights than today. Young workers could not work at night or for too many hours, and they had more holidays. There were more and better rights than nowadays. Today they pay 8 hours and you work 10 hours. Before, overtime got paid. Now you can work from morning until the next day and you won't get paid. This is democracy. Well, before it was terrorism, and she laughed. joking, about this whole ideology as well of socialism being totalitarian and undemocratic, while in fact the situation in which many workers are living today is very undemocratic, especially this whole exploitation that has been intensifying very much in private companies. Yeah, and so that was also part of the research. Often workers would want to express their positive feeling for the past, but were afraid of doing so because of the stigmatization of nostalgia for the socialist period. So one of the phrases that you will hear a lot is "I'm not Yugo-nostalgic, but," or similar phrases that will kind of shelter these workers from an accusation of being nostalgic of socialism, while in fact they were expressing their wish for better welfare and labor conditions. So in a number of these cities and towns, these factories are now in ruin. They're abandoned. Some of them have been demolished already. This one, this Dalmatinka factory here, I took pictures of, has been demolished a couple of years ago. And the workers really feel like sort of some kind of source of not just sociability and belonging, but also some source of future possibilities and life has been taken away from them. So for instance, Dalmatinka, she was the mother of all the inhabitants of the city of Sinj, of its surroundings. She fed us, our children, our grandchildren, and we had a future. However, the war came and things did not stay like that. While we worked, there was welfare for all, possibilities, good wages, houses were built, and the future of our children was built. Now the factory is so abandoned, so pillaged, so destroyed, that it's terrible and ugly to tell our children and grandchildren that we once worked there. So again, this strong devaluation and stigmatization of workers, and especially devaluation of women's industrial work. That was something very crucial in the previous regime, and that has been kind of wiped out in post-Yugoslav states when it comes to women's labor. Luckily, there has been some interesting intergenerational solidarity and resistance. So my last chapter is about workers' resilience, but it's also about a number of projects that have been started by younger activists that are aiming to recover the heritage, industrial heritage of some of these factories, and are aiming to valorize the dignity of industrial work of their families. Many times when I talk to friends from the former Yugoslavia, they will tell me, oh, my mom also worked in a textile factory, or my aunt also worked in a textile factory, my grandmother. So it was really widespread for women to work in these factories, especially in the early socialist period. And a number of young activists have been creating some cultural centers, such as the one in Stipi, Macedonia, where I was invited a couple of years ago. It didn't exist when I started my research, so it's a really interesting development, and it's led by a former textile worker who is now a cultural activist and is lobbying for better rights in the sector. And there's also the Dalmatinka project in Sinj, which was already there when I started the research, and I could have their help in gathering some of the workers. They already did a documentary, and lately they also organized a very successful exhibition, which is called "What Did Dalmatinka Give to Us?" So about the value of the factory for the whole community. There were a number of solidarity initiatives with Kamensko workers during the hunger strike in Zagreb, and also during the strike in Pula in 2014. So these are all initiatives that are showing that there is a increasing interest for workers' lives and workers' narratives and stories in the region, especially as a number of new social movements came about in the 2010. So there were all these social movements that were kind of re-interrogating this idea of labor, and what is decent labor, and how should labor be treated, and in a better way, and in a decent way. So to conclude, the nostalgia for welfare socialism that is there at the moment in post-Yugoslav states is a consequence of the current neo-capitalist system, and of the current exploitation of labor. And it's a reflexive nostalgia that is not a critical of the past, but is based on the industrial structure of feeling developed during such past. And former and current workers' resilience and past memories are often used as a source of pride, dignity, and identity. And a number of workers really hark back to this idea of the dignity of their manual labor to sustain themselves during transition. And another issue that's important for the book is that gender, class, and generation are shaping workers' narratives very much more than ethnicity or nationality. So all over the region, it was a specific generation of working class women that express a certain narrative, and that's something that went beyond any national or ethnic borders. And that's why the lens of social history, of labor history and gender history is crucial to understand the region and to complicate the ethnicity and nation paradigm that has been dominating the scholarship since the 1990s. I think I went already a bit over time. I'll conclude here. Thank you so much.